If you like what you're hearing, you can support me on Patreon, patreon.com/mtgbooks, or look me up, Phil Dawson. Thanks. Chapter 17, Forsaken. He was no stranger to pain. He knew it in many forms, from the bite of a sky-shroud snake to the ragged kiss of a merfolk blade. His had been an active life, and he had endured many injuries. There were worse forms of suffering than the physical kind. The vision of a wife and the burned and shattered remains of a home they'd built together. An empty bed where a gentle daughter had slept and died. He learned to kill his enemies as revenge for these hurts. Didn't help, but he was never troubled by their blood on his hands. What did weigh on his conscience were all the dead friends and allies, people he led to war who died for his cause. Each of their lost lives was one more scar to bear, a burden he knew would grow larger before life was done with him. Since he was alone, Eladamri let the tears flow down his lined face. He'd always been awake, even through the worst of Greven's torment. At times, his mind departed on its own, leaving him unsure of what he was seeing or feeling. He thought he remembered, Greven Ilvac sitting across the table from him, watching him with something like puzzlement on his evil face. He'd been joined by another, someone Eldamari hadn't known. His erratic eyes showed him the face of Fura, the core tribal chief, but Fura was dead. His daughter was dead too, yet someone was walking around with her face. Was this unholy fortress full of ghosts? Tears softened the crust of dried blood that glued his right eye shut. He opened both eyes and stretched them wide. Coals glowed feebly in the iron brazier by his feet. Thumbscrews, branding irons, and other horrible instruments lay scattered about. He could smell water in the pot on the table. Licking his parched lips, Eldamri yearned for a sip. Thinking him unconscious, Greven had tied Eldamri to the chair by the wrists and ankles. A mistake. Eldamri relaxed his hands, folding his fingers inward to make his wrists as small as possible. He worked his left hand backward against the cords. The black rope was made of the same mimetic cable used on Predator, and was thus a form of nanomachine-like flowstone. When he pulled against it, it shrank tighter around his wrist. He stopped, and the cord ceased shrinking. Eldamri realized Greven's mistake was not so grievous. If he continued to fight the mimetic cord, it would eventually cut his hands off. He leaned forward and managed to lift the rear legs of the chair off the floor. The chair weighed a good 45 pounds, but once he got it rocking, it was easy enough to tip it over. It crashed to the floor hard on his left side, the brazier overturned, scattering embers. How did magic rope like heat? Eldamri scraped a glowing coal closer with his ruined fingers. What did a blister or two matter when your fingers were already broken? He pressed the cord against the coal. A stab of heat passed through the binding to his wrist. Nothing else happened. So much for burning off the cords. He heaved the heavy chair forward to a pile of now cold branding irons. He couldn't quite wrestle the heavy irons into his grasp with just his fingertips. Now what? He could see the pottery pitcher on the table above him. What he wanted most, perhaps even more than his freedom, was a cool drink of water. Since he couldn't get to the pitcher so long as he was tied to the chair, it was a moot point. Eldamri butted his head against the table leg. He did this again and again until his vision dissolved in a haze of bread. This couldn't go on. With the lightest touch, he let his battered head rest against the table leg inside. The jug, shaken to the edge of the table, promptly toppled to the floor. It smashed to pieces in a spray of water. None splashed his face. Not my best day, he decided. The pitcher was boneware, a hard, glassy pottery suitable for his purpose. He picked a nice, jagged shard and sawed against the cords. For a moment, the mimetic strands tightened, then began to fray. His heart leaped when a cord sprang free of his wrists and wriggled on the floor like a headless lizard. A few cuts more and his right hand was loose. Then his feet. Adamri tried to stand but found his abused knees wouldn't let him. He sat on the floor, free but too hurt to walk. He tied pieces of cord together and used it to bind an iron to his left leg as a splint. Using the table for support, he managed to stand. He grabbed the cup on the table and prepared to down the contents, but when it neared his lips, his nose detected an acrid odor. Poison. Meant for him, no doubt. Here he almost did Grevin's job for him. His meager possessions lay strewn on the table. The only thing he took back was the small wooden fetish he'd carved his last night in the forest. He examined it carefully. It was intact. He hung it around his neck. Aladamri found another branding iron with a blunt hook on the end to serve as a weapon. He went to the cell door and found it unlocked. That worried him. Why wasn't he locked in? Was this some kind of elaborate trap so Grevin could claim Aladamri was killed trying to escape? A muffled mechanical clangor filtered through the stout walls, some sort of alarm. That's why Grevin had gone. He swiftly made the connection to his young warriors and their mission to destroy the airship. Aladamri did not pray, but he fervently wished his comrade success. The odds were long against them. He hobbled into the corridor. No one in sight. The conical tower's shape meant the passage ran outboard of the cells, which were arranged around the axis of the tower like slices of pie. As he looked both ways down the vacant corridor, his guerrilla instinct gave him an idea. Never overlook a chance to cause maximum trouble for the enemy. He went to the next door. It was locked. The mechanism was protected by a nasty-looking flowbot whose jagged jaws encircled the lock. Use the wrong key or try to fiddle with the device, your hand could be bitten off. Aladamri rapped softly on the door. He pressed his ear to the panel and heard shuffling of feet inside. There was a low wicket through which the prisoner was given meals. He opened the sliding gate and whispered, "Hello? Who's in there? I'm a friend." Instead of a voice or a face, a fleshy red tentacle appeared and wrapped itself around Aladamri's leg. A burning sensation started where the thing touched him, and its grip tightened and tightened. He was sorry for whatever beast or freak Volrath had imprisoned, but wasn't about to lose his leg in a show of sympathy. A few well-aimed blows of his iron discouraged the creature, and the tentacle was withdrawn. The next 3 doors were either closed on empty cells, or else the occupants didn't feel like responding to Aladamri's summons. At the 5th door, he distinctly heard a thin voice talking or singing. Bending low to the wicket, he hissed, "You human in there?" "Are you human out there?" was the sarcastic response. "I'm a Sky Shroud elf, prisoner as you are. I'll let you out." No answer. He gingerly inserted the iron into the lock mechanism. Sure enough, the flowbot's jaws snapped shut, deeply indenting the hard iron bar. Aladamri leaned all his weight on the trap tool, and with a crack, broke the lock without dislodging the flowbot protecting it. The door opened into the corridor. The smell of filth from inside was overwhelming. Something gray stirred within, and for a second, Aladamri thought he'd been tricked by another one of Volrath's monsters. The gray shape became a human form, a gaunt, red-haired young woman of modest height, clad in filthy rags. She blinked at the light. "You're an elf?" she said. "Thought my time had come, and Volrath was playing a little game with me." "Who are you?" "My name is Takara, daughter of Stark." He knew the name from Darset Elm Doll. Takara had been part of an early doll resistance movement. Why was she still alive? Takara slumped against the door. "There been a revolution, or are you the new chief warder?" "Neither. I'm escaping if I can. If you'd be free, come along." Though limping himself, he gave an arm to the stranger. Takara didn't look like she'd been Grevin's guest in the interrogation cell. Her skin was unmarked, but she was terribly thin and weak, probably starved for weeks. She looked down at his makeshift splint and battered hands. "You're not in any shape for this, are you?" "I'm not alone," he advised. "Some of my people are in the Citadel. We gotta find them." Takara lowered her head to his shoulder. "Oh well, this has broken the tedium." The alarm bell seized. been part of the background so long its sudden cessation seemed louder than the noise had been. In its place, they heard footfalls echoing along the curving corridor. Takara lifted her head. "The world's shortest escape," she said, sighing. Eldamri had a finger to his lips. He pulled the iron splint from his tortured leg. Without the brace, he almost collapsed. Takara held him up, though her frail arms trembled from the effort. He nodded thanks. They huddled in the shallow recess of a shut cell door, waiting for the runners to appear. Eldamri caught a glimpse of wrathy boots and breastplate and swung his iron. It whistled by Carreno's nose, missing him by a hair. "Brother!" the Vec rebel cried. "It's us!" The momentum of the swing carried Eldamri to the floor. Takara couldn't disentangle herself and fell on top of him. The two were gently separated by Carreno and one of Tainel's many cousins, Seamus. They propped the elf against the wall. "Be easy, brother," Carreno said. He took the water bottle from his hip and gave it to Eldamri. He drank greedily until he saw Takara watching him with parted lips. He wiped the mouth of the bottle and offered it to her. Takara seized the bottle with both hands and raised it high. Water spurted from the corners of her mouth and ran down her chin, cutting white tracks in the gray grime on her face. Eldamri smiled. "What news of Tainel, Lynn Civvy, and the rest?" "We fear Tainel and Cousin Garnet are dead," Seamus put in. "We're trying to find the lower airship dock we heard about and got lost in some tunnels deep in the fortress. Tainel and Garnet went ahead to scout, but we were attacked." "Grevin? Krovax?" "Creatures! Monsters!" Carreno said. "Poor Velen put his hands in a nest of them. These two-legged rat balls devoured him. We had to run. We had no weapons to fight with them. We were supposed to meet Lynn Civvy and her men at the hall where we saw Grevin and Krovax, but the bell started ringing. There were guards all over the place. So we came to find you instead." Seamus finished Carreno's sentence for him. "What's it like in the Citadel?" "Chaos," Carreno replied. "They're bringing troops in from the city garrison, I heard them say. The whole place will be overrun with soldiers." "Civvy must have drawn their attention. Very well. Need to get out of sight for a while and wait for things to calm a bit before we try to get out," the elf said. "Where can we go?" said Seamus. "Grevin's bound to return here to finish with me," said Eldamri. "Can't decide whether to ambush him here or clear out to fight another day." "Begging your pardon, old Eldamri, but you're in no shape to fight," Carreno said. "Let's find a quiet corner to hide you in, as you said." Takara interjected. "The map room," she said. "It's the next building over, before you get to the Mog Warrens. It's for the Evankar's use only, so no one goes there much." "You know your way around this maze?" She looped dirty copper hair behind her ears. "My father was Volrath's mentor and later his servant. I know something about the stronghold." She handed the empty water bottle to Eldamri. "The map room it is." He and Takara had to be helped to stand. They braced each other. Takara smiled wryly. "Never know what you'll find behind a closed door, do you?" When the alarm went off, Belby was in the control room of the Flowstone factory, making the third of her subversive adjustments to the output meter. As she suspected, the monitoring units built into the factory machinery had detected the reduced output by comparing current production figures to those of the past. All through the day, the production of Flowstone steadily increased. By the time she arrived late that night, the works were churning out Flowstone at 90% of capacity. The speed at which the factory corrected itself troubled her. It meant she'd have to be more vigilant in her sabotage if her goal was preventing the conjunction with Dominaria was to be met. When the alarm sounded, she covered all traces of her tampering and started back to the palace to find out what was going on. She found the corridors clogged with guards. Through the palace garrison, numbered over 2,000 men, she'd found hundreds of troops of the regular army mustering on the factory concourse. She accosted a captain of the 10th Company and asked him what he knew about the situation. Forgive me, Excellency, I do not know much more than you do," the officer said. "I heard something about Predator, a riot between Mogs and the workers, maybe? I don't know." "Why would they need so many troops to quell a brawl?" "There's thousands of Mogs in the Warrens, Excellency. If they get out of hand, it'd take an entire army to put them down." "Who's commanding this operation?" The captain frowned and pointed. Belby followed his gesture and saw a sergeant standing on a flowboat armature shouting orders. The Corps of Sergeants was involved. It meant Krovax was in charge. Belby was seized by a sense of foreboding. He smelled a plot. Krovax had engineered an emergency in order to flood the Citadel with army troops. It gave him an unbeatable advantage in the struggle for power. True, she had offered him the Evankar's crown, but that was just a ploy to save Urtai's life. She still held out hope that with Greven's help she could suppress Krovax and lead Rath in an entirely new direction. Now things looked very bad, if not hopeless. Once in the palace, she learned that there had been a disturbance in the upper airship dock. She went there immediately and found the pinnacle heavily occupied. The docking platform was littered with slain guards, and the air was spiced with the smell of burnt gunpowder. Predator floated evenly on its tether, but there was obvious damage to the deckhouse and main bridge. She easily picked out Greven and Krovax among the massive troops. Greven bowed when he saw her. Greven did not. She approached Greven. "What's the matter?"
"Things are unclear at the moment, Excellency," he replied. "We're questioning the workers and Mogs who were on board when this happened. We're not getting a coherent story from any of them. The guards who responded to the first call for help are all dead. Killed by that."
He indicated the 12-foot-long harpoon, head now embedded in a far wall of the platform.
"Someone fired the deck gun without closing the breach. The gun's mangled, the harpoon cut down more than 20 men at once."
What do the workers say?
"They say the Mogs went berserk and attacked them."
And what do the Mogs say?
"Mogs are Mogs," Greven said. "I've learned not to put much stock in what they say."
"Tell her,"
Krovax said. He seemed half angry, half excited.
"Tell her what they said."
"It's not proven,"
Greven said evenly. Even this mild contradiction brought swift retaliation from Krovax. Greven's face contorted as his spinal rod sizzled into action. "Enough!" Belby said. "You tell me, Krovax." Krovax made his hulking victim suffer for a few seconds, then released him.
"The Morgs claim they were attacked by soldiers, men of the army."
Why would our own soldiers attack Predator? Krovax leaned closer and in a mocking whisper said,
"When is a rabbit not a rabbit?
What?
When it's a fox."
Sergeant Nasser on the foredeck of the airship hailed his master. Krovax excused himself politely and went to see what Nasser had to tell him. Belby turned to Greven. The warlord still had his eyes tightly shut. "Greven," she said, "are you all right?"
"He's learned to inflict lingering pain," Greven said through clenched teeth. "He's done this to me several times in the past few days. He punishes me or amuses himself with my suffering. I think it's over, but he leaves me a surprise. Lately it's been acute pain when light hits my eyes."
Belby lowered her voice. "I'm sorry to hear that. Would you walk with me a moment? I have a proposal I want you to hear."
"As you command, Excellency." "First,"
Greven's eyes sprang open. They were shot with blood, and when the normal light of the stronghold hit them, he grimaced and uttered a short cry of agony. "Does it hurt so much?"
"I'm getting used to it,"
Greven grunted.
"However, if I don't gratify Lord Krovax's sense of humor by screaming, he will redouble the effect next time."
Belby shuddered. "Come, I have something important and secret to tell you." She led him into the shadow of the flowstone carapace, dismissing the guards who were already there. When they were alone, Belby began. "The time has come for plain speaking. Krovax has been pressuring me to name him Evankar, after many threats and some violence. I've agreed to do so tomorrow afternoon in the convocation hall."
"I've wondered why you delayed this long,"
said Greven. She was taken aback. "At first, I wanted him to prove himself worthy. Later, I became afraid of what he would do when in total power was his. I saw what he did to the hostages. I was there. It troubled him no more than you or I swatting a fly. I discovered he gains power when life is extinguished. He absorbs the life force of dying beings into himself. Don't you see? That guarantees people will continue to die."
"We will all die sometime, Excellency."
Belby's hands closed into fists. "What's the matter with you? Of all people, I expected you to understand. He torments you. He mocks you. It will only get worse. Can't you see that? Have you no ambition for yourself, Greven? If we could forge an alliance against Krovax, we could change things on Rath."
"Krovax is too powerful. He controls the flowstone."
Urtai has influence over the stone, too. Not as great at Krovax, but sufficient to even the odds if you and I attack him together. Grevin made a pretense of looking around.
Where is Urtai?
I don't know. Krovax's men are holding him prisoner.
Then he's a dead man.
No, she said forcefully. Give me your word. Promise you'll join us against Krovax, and I'll find Urtai this night and free him.
I cannot.
Belby was visibly deflated by Grevin's flat rejection.
There is more at stake here than you know, Excellency. I cannot act as you ask. My loyalties are committed.
Don't believe it, she said. I know you hate him. Can it be you're afraid of him as well? She thought this taunt, which always enraged Grevin in the past, would arouse him again. The hulking warlord turned away without a word.
I'm not free to act, Excellency, Grevin said. I never have been. Though I command armies and the flag on Predator's bridge is mine, I do not have command of myself. I'm sorry.
Speechless, Belby watched him return to the hubbub surrounding the damaged airship. On the way, he was intercepted by an officer of the palace guard in a crimson mantle. Though Grevin outranked anyone else in the guards or regular army, she distinctly saw him salute this minor officer. Krovax really has him rattled, she decided. Her options were shrinking hour by hour. Urtai captive, Grevin immobilized, even the rebel leader Eldamri was no longer a threat. Krovax stood alone on the field, waiting for Belby to place a crown upon his head. She must find Urtai. Once she knew he was safe, she would go to her last resource. If he didn't help her, then every living being on Rath was doomed. Carreno and Seamus, still attired like soldiers of the Fourth Company, boldly walked out into the open causeway connecting the prison to the map tower. 2 sentries were posted on the bridge between the buildings, one on each side, facing each other. Carreno and Seamus approached in measured step.
Halt!
The Vec rebel shouted, hoping to sound military.
What's this?
Asked the sentry on the right, nearest Carreno.
For your relief.
The rebels waited tensely. The guards relaxed their stance.
About bloody time,
one guard groused. Should have been relieved 2 hours ago.
There's trouble in the Citadel,
Seamus said. That's why they sent for the Fourth Company.
Oh yeah? You guys talk a lot, but what makes you so great?
We captured Eladamri, Carreno said. The sentries couldn't top that, and they didn't try. They shouldered their polearms and prepared to march back to the Citadel. Then one of the guards stopped. Hey, how do you plan to stand guard without any weapons? Seamus and Carreno exchanged quick glances. They wouldn't let us through the palace armed, said the dull rebel.
What? In a general alarm?
Carreno dodged the sweep of a poleaxe and charged in before the guard could recover. He hit the man high, carrying him along until they reached the edge of the bridge. The Vec gave an extra shove, and the guard toppled backward over the rail. His scream faded as he fell, and it was soon drowned out by the constant background rumble of the factory energy beam. Seamus had more trouble with his man. He avoided the guard's spearhead, but the back swipe of the shaft caught him behind the knees, and down he went. That would have been the end of him if Carreno hadn't jumped on the guard's back, knocking the Rathy soldier's helmet off in the process. They fell in a tangle on top of Seamus and rolled over and over in a flurry of fists and kicking feet. Eladamri and Takara came out of hiding in the prison tower gate. By the time they reached the scuffle, the unfortunate guard was hanging by his hands over the side of the bridge. Seamus was out cold, and Carreno was bleeding from a busted lip.
Help! Help me!
Yelled the guard. Eladamri and Takara stood over him. The Rathy soldier stopped shouting.
Please help me,
he said. The elf held out his hands.
Thanks to Grevin Vec, there's not much I can do,
he said. Lady, please help. Takara looked around. She spotted the guard's poleaxe. In her weakened condition, she couldn't fully pick it up, so she dragged it by the butt end to the edge of the causeway.
That's it,
said the guard.
Hand me the shaft and I'll climb up.
Takara said nothing, but held the poleaxe shaft over the guard's head. He regarded her quizzically until she let go. The stout shaft connected solidly with the soldier's bare head, and he disappeared with a screech. The poleaxe tipped up and followed him into oblivion. "A waste of a good arm," Carreno said. He knelt by Seamus and patted his face roughly to revive him. Eladamri leaned on the rail, looking intently at Takara. "That was cold." "I learned from an early age, if someone gets in your way, put him aside," said Takara. They cleaned up the bridge and all traces of trouble and hurried to the map tower. The door was locked, but Takara claimed she knew how to circumvent the mechanism. She fearlessly thrust her hand into the Flowbot jaws and manipulated the lock inside. Eladamri and the rebels waited to see if the jaws would bite off her slender arm. "My father taught me this," she said. "Good for sneaking in where you're not allowed. I hope Rath hasn't changed the lock since he threw me in prison." With a loud clank, the doors spread apart. Takara carefully withdrew her arm from the lock. "After you," said Eladamri. The interior of the map tower was suffused with wavering green light, which fostered the odd sensation of being underwater. It came from the tower cone, glazed entirely with heavy, irregular panes of jade green glass. The upper half of the map tower was taken up by some kind of complex machinery, all gears and cams and glowing power stones. Takara led Eladamri and the rebels into an amphitheater which filled the bottom quarter of the structure. This single room was over 300 feet wide and featured two concentric seating platforms focused on a central column of intricate design. A set of wide steps descended into the column, and overhead a segmented gantry curled above the central pillar like a tail of a huge metallic scorpion. As they entered the vast empty chamber, their footsteps rang hollowly off the green glass walls. "Welcome to the map room," Takara said. Her voice was still weak from privation, yet the acoustics of the map room enabled her voice to be heard easily. "I don't see any maps," said Seamus, still groggy from his fight on the bridge. "I'll show you." She descended a staircase to the inner ring of seats. At the foot of the steps was a panel covered with strange glyphs and symbols. Takara stood before this arcane altar, hands poised. Then, as if playing a musical instrument, her fingers flew over the controls, touching the symbols and complex sequences. With a deep hum, the enormous machine awoke. The broad descending column, covered with the brazen cogwheels and bundles of tubing, retracted ponderously into the ceiling. It left behind a thick stump, serrated with large angular flaps. These flaps folded outward and stopped. When the column was about 30 feet up, it locked in place. "Now what?" Eladamri asked in a hushed voice. "Here." She stroked a single glyph. The air between the column and the serrated base shimmered. A swirl of gray and green fog formed, whirling on both axes. It darkened, became opaque, and assumed the shape of an oval spinning globe. More definition developed, and the rapid rotation slowed. In seconds, the globe settled into a mottled gray egg, turning slowly on its vertical axis. "Rath," Takara said. Eladamri looked on, fascinated. "This is Rath?" Takara nodded. "For years, I've heard philosophers debate priests about the shape of the world. Most of the holy ones taught the world is flat, surrounded by a void like a stone lying in a stream. Some philosophers claimed it was round like an egg." "Which did you believe?" "I always considered it unimportant, since no one can see the whole shape of the world at once. What difference does it make what shape it is?" "It's with knowledge like this that the Evankar can locate and strike his enemies." "Show me the Sky Shroud Forest," he said. Takara toyed with the controls, and the gray globe was instantly replaced by a flattened half-sphere. Centered in the portion facing Eladamri was a broad, irregular patch of dark green. "This is Sky Shroud as seen from a height of 100,000 feet," she said. Punching a button made the green patch treble in size. "From 20,000 feet. Takara touched the panel one more time, and the image swelled to cover the entire hemisphere. "From 10,000 feet, she said. "This is how it looks from Predator." Eladamri looked for the Eye of Karai, his village, and other features he knew. None were discernible. There was texture to the image made up of taller and shorter trees, but the canopy was as featureless as the sea. "Now I know why Rath and Greven have such trouble catching us," the elf said. Even with this great artifact, the Sky Shroud is still our shield and sanctuary. Intrigued by the maps, Carreno and Seamus came down and joined them. For several minutes, the rebels were lost in the bird's-eye view of Rath. Here's something none of you have ever seen. Takara played the panel expertly, and the hemispherical view of Rath was replaced by a brilliantly colored globe. Compared to Rath, which was made up of shades of gray, green, and brown, this world was a blinding array of colors. Bright blue oceans, yellow and red deserts, smoky purple mountains. Feathery clouds filled the atmosphere, softening the contrasts between the sharper colors. The whole thing was like a jewel, a bauble fit for an empress's brow. Something about the colorful world moved Eladamri deeply. What is that, Takara? Dominaria. He knew the name. Weatherlight had come from there, with its motley crew of heroes, and so had Krovax. Dominaria. The name tripped from his tongue as pleasingly as the rainbow sphere delighted his eye. Tell me about Dominaria, he said. It's the original home of our kind, yours and mine, Takara replied. The ancestors of every soul on Rath came from there. Some ancient sages even say the overlords came from there long ago. There's a prophecy that says the demon world will one day tear apart the clouds and rain destruction on the bright world. I think the seers knew what we're only beginning to realize. The purpose of Rath is to destroy Dominaria. How can that be? They're separate worlds. I know people and machines fly between them, but how can Rath destroy another world? Weary, Takara braced herself against the control panel. I was never educated about such high things. What I can tell you, Rath is a shadow created by the overlords of Phyrexia as a gateway to Dominaria. Just as sleeping mortals serve as bridges to the terrors of the night, so is Rath the nightmare bridge to Dominaria. For hundreds of years, Rath has been growing, coming closer to the old home world. The stronghold is the key point, the focus of the overlord's grand design. This dark fortress is where nightmares are made flesh, the sword point against Dominaria's throat. Gods preserve us, Seamus muttered. You said your father served Volrath. Where is he now? The elf asked. Gone. Away? She shuffled backward from the panel. I don't know where. Why didn't Volrath kill you? Does he know of your work with the rebellion? She laughed dryly. Volrath cared nothing about my work with the Dahl Resistance. He locked me up to make certain my father wouldn't betray him. Takara's eyes rolled back at her head. Carreno sprang to her side and caught her in his arms. Without her hands on the controls, the map apparatus shut down. The double sphere of Rath Dominaria rapidly lost color and definition, finally winking out like a vanishing soap bubble.